Maybe if you're looking for inspiration, you'll turn your palms up. Maybe if you're hoping for introspection, you turn your palms down. You could even bring your hands to your heart, whatever feels comfortable for you in this moment. And then make a conscious choice about how you would like to place your eyes. You could choose to close them, to maybe screen out a bit of outer stimulation to help you come into this moment more deeply. Or perhaps it feels more auspicious for you to cast your eyelids downward and to find a soft drishti on the floor, a gaze point that's gentle and sweet, not laser-like, but soft. And then perhaps check in with your breath, noting for a moment how your inhalation is traveling into your body and how your exhalation is exiting your body. And just as with your body, give your breath the freedom to be what it is and meet it in this moment without any judgment. Notice if it's showing up as a 2-part breath, or a 3-part breath, or a 4-part breath. And accept whatever manifests. Perhaps there is a tiny pause or gap at the top or at the bottom of the breath. And perhaps there isn't. Just gather information without expectation. With a simple acceptance of the breath as it is in this moment. A simple acceptance of your body as it is in this moment. And then equally sweetly and kindly and compassionately check in with your mind to notice what you're bringing to the mat this evening. Maybe the echo of your day, or maybe expectations about this weekend. Maybe issues or concerns that are present for you in your life at the moment. And simply become mindful of these mind matters. Meet them in the same way you're meeting your body and your breath, with a sweet acceptance, with compassion, without judgment. Meeting your thoughts and emotions in this way simply suggests to them that they can come and go, that right now you will likely not engage with them or fight them or analyze them, but you're simply noticing them. Gaining greater awareness of everything that shows up on the mat for you today. In your mind, in your breath, in your energy, in your body. And then perhaps take a moment to invite your intuitive self and your joyful self to the mat as well. They may not be as palpable or tangible as the other layers of self. But it's still worthwhile to invite them to be here, even if in the background. To remind yourself that your wise self, your intuitive self, is always there, more or less hidden, more or less accessible. And to remind yourself that underneath all of these layers, there is this blissful, joyful self that will manifest when the moment is auspicious. And so invite your wise and your joyful layers of self or states of consciousness without any expectation about them showing up. And perhaps simply with a sense of gratitude for knowing that they are present with you somewhere, somehow. And from this place of having accessed all of your layers of consciousness, I invite you to bow your head to your own heart and to take a moment to invite an intention for your time on the mat today and perhaps for the entire weekend. Perhaps something very concrete arises for you, or perhaps something very subtle, or maybe nothing at all. But whatever shows up or doesn't, just open your heart and your mind to it. And if it feels auspicious, you might choose to breathe that intention into your heart and into your community of yogis that's coming together here yet again to celebrate the joy of yoga. With your next exhalation, if you had lifted your hands, you might choose to lower them. If your eyes were closed, you might choose to open them. And welcome everyone. So for those of you who just signed in, we are starting with a bit of a practice. So you'll need a mat, block, and a blanket. So you can actually stay in your seat. If you were in a seat that's asymmetrical, you might want to switch the cross of your legs. Or if you picked a seat that was symmetrical, maybe you choose something else. Check in with yourself, maybe after the opening centering, your body gave you signals that something else might actually be nicer for you. And then of course, you can also always just wiggle and shake for a moment to transition yourself. And then from here, I invite you yet again to attune to your body, starting this time by sensing the grounding into the earth of all of the places of your body that are actually making contact with the earth. So that may be your feet, it might be portions of your legs or your entire legs, your sits bones, the flesh around the sits bones. And invite yourself to really feel that sense of grounding. You might even imagine growing roots or just growing some kind of connection to your seat so that you have a sense of restfulness here, a sense of having arrived in this moment, of having arrived in this place. Your eyes can be open or closed here. It's completely up to you. And then as you sense into your connection to the earth, you might also sense that there is a sort of rebound force and energy that is now rising up into your body. It's like you're plugging into the earth's energy field, and there's some energy that's coming back into your body from this restful seat that you've chosen. And just notice if you can use that energy to find a bit of lightness, a bit of expansiveness through your spine, all the way through your skull to the crown of the head, maybe feeling some actual physical lengthening, or just imagining this upward flow of energy along the length of your spine. You might begin to sense this at the very bottom of the spine, where your tailbone might make some indirect contact with the earth, and then feeling that energy rising up from the tailbone into your sacrum, that triangular bone that's directly above the tailbone, and sort of the second segment of your spine if you're coming from the bottom up. And then you might sense that same upward energy through the lumbar spine, which is your lower back, that section of the spine that rests on top of your sacrum. And from there, you might feel energy rising up through your thoracic spine, maybe even with an expansiveness that reaches into your rib basket, which is attached to your thoracic spine. And then perhaps you feel that energy rising up through the cervical spine, through your neck. And then perhaps you feel that energy moving into your cranium, to the top of the head, almost with a sense of having a force attached to the top of your head that's supporting your natural upright posture that is so steady and balanced when the natural curves of the spine can show up. And so bring again into your awareness both that sense of grounding and restfulness on the earth, and then that sense of expansion through the spine, through the top of the head. And then from here, perhaps draw your attention to the center of your being, to the very core of your body. And notice the stability that you can create here by perhaps drawing the ribs a tiny bit toward the tops of the hips, by engaging perhaps your strong abdominal muscles, not overly contracting them. This is a very gentle engagement. It's just a noticing of the stabilizing force of those superficial and deep abdominal muscles. You could even bring your hands to that part of your body if you really want to get a sense of that. Sometimes it helps to bring the thumbs to the lower ribs and the little fingers to the tops of the hips, and to feel that sense of drawing the ribs just a tiny bit closer to the hips without flexing the spine, but just to engage the belly a bit. And you might notice as you do this that there's an impact on the breath here. And just take note of that. And then without losing the stability of your seat, you can relax again. Relax out of this deliberate contraction into just letting the abdominals do what they need to do to help stabilize you back. Then I invite you to place your hands next to you on the floor. Get ready for just a tiny bit of movement. And so with your next inhalation, lift your arms up and overhead. And with the exhalation, draw them down to your side, very deliberate, as if you were pushing through a substance, so that you feel your muscles engage on your arms. And then just notice if as you inhale the arms up, you can feel a little bit of lengthening in the spine. And as you exhale the arms down, if you can return to that sense of grounding and restfulness at the base of the spine. We'll do this 2 or 3 more times, depending on your own breath cycle. And if you do feel any sense of increased expansiveness through the spine here, you might be in what some people call axial extension of the spine. Next time your arms travel down to your side, you can keep them by your side. And take a round of breath. And then release yourself from your seat and come to tabletop. If you know you have sensitive knees, I invite you to bring a blanket under your knees. If you know you have sensitive wrists, maybe a blanket under the wrists is nice. Or maybe walking the hands a little bit farther ahead of your shoulders might feel good. So just be very deliberate in how you place your body here. And then as you move into this tabletop or quadruped shape, notice if you can still feel a sense of grounding through the base of the spine and a sense of lengthening through the length of the spine, through the crown of the head. And then we'll start with a very subtle movement. So this is kind of a cat and cow movement, but only in the pelvis. We're not going to involve the whole back. So you're going to roll your pelvis forward. You might not even see this on the screen at all. And then you'll roll your pelvis back. This is a very, very small movement. Almost entirely in the region of your sacrum and perhaps your lumbar spine. You could even, if you feel balanced, bring one hand to that part of your body to feel, to have another way of accessing the sensation of this movement, or you can just feel it from the inside out. And just notice how when your pelvis rolls forward, there maybe is a bit more of a curve in your lower back, in your lumbar spine. And when you roll the pelvis back, there's a bit of a flattening, but not overly so, because you're really just staying in a very small range of motion. We'll do that a couple more times. If you have a hand on your back to feel that motion, you could switch, or you could just stop with that external feedback. Another thing you can do here if you want feedback is to actually take a block and put it on your thoracic spine and make sure it doesn't move as you're rolling your pelvis, so that you actually know that you've isolated that movement into the lower back. And then if you did what I did, which is place a block there, go ahead and take it off. And then let that movement become more conventional. So maybe dropping the belly a little bit more, letting that extension of the spine travel into the other sections of the spine. And then as you exhale, drawing the center of your body up and coming into more flexion of the spine, rounding. And just notice how this feels different from just isolating the movement in the lower back region. As you move through this 2 or 3 times. And then the next time you've been in cat, when you return toward the ground, stay in neutral and reassemble yourself into your tabletop shape. Notice if you want any changes here from what you had chosen before. Maybe if you didn't choose a blanket, you want one now. And then see if you can keep your pelvis relatively stable and bring the flexion and extension just high into the spine at the level of your thorax. The thoracic spine, the part of your spine that has the rib basket attached to it. And you could bring your hand to the sacrum again, or to the lumbar, to see if that's possible for you. And you might notice that it's a lot harder to isolate the movement here. And you might want to be curious to see how much movement you can actually have here without creating it with your shoulder joints. Easy to cheat here. And then let that come to rest and take your extension and flexion simply into the cervical spine, just the neck moving very gently up and down. So don't overdo this. Don't make a huge range of motion here. This is just an exploration of flexion and extension in different parts of your spine. And then let yourself move naturally into some really just almost like undulations of the spine, and just see what naturally wants to emerge here from your spine. They don't have to be cats and cows. They can be some combination of isolation, and just notice what you notice. How is your spine showing up here for you? Maybe there are even some wiggles and shakes that your body wants to make to release any tension, either from the movements we made or that you brought with you from before. And then go ahead and find a seat of your choice. You could have a block between the feet. You could have a roll of something under your ankles, or you could be up on your toes, whatever feels okay for you. And then very gently, you can use your breath to guide you. As you exhale, lower the right ear toward the right shoulder. As you inhale, come up. As you exhale, switch sides, using your own breath cycle. And again, just exploring a comfortable range of motion here, not expecting that ear to actually land on the shoulder, but just noticing what's present for you in this moment. As you now laterally flex your cervical spine. Notice any repeats that show up here, or fascias of wanting a particular range of motion. Just see if you can let go of that. Just let that range of motion happen from the inside out, sort of based on your body wisdom. The next time you laterally flex your neck to the left, when you come up, you can be finished with this movement. And then either from the same seat, or if you need to switch to a different seat, bring your arms back up. And then with an exhalation, laterally flex, lower in the body. This time maybe holding the neck at center. So bringing that lateral flexion more into the thoracic spine, and perhaps a little bit into the lumbar spine. Just see how much you can isolate this movement and where you feel it. We'll just take another breath or two here. And then with your next inhalation, you can come to center. And with the exhalation, you'll switch sides. Of course, without any expectation that your range of motion will be the same on this side. And you can use the lifted arm as sort of a gauge that you're not laterally flexing the neck, but that you're holding it in a relatively neutral position. As you're laterally flexing through perhaps the thoracic and the lumbar spine. And this time, as you're holding here, notice what kinds of forces you feel in the body. Do you feel tension, which is really stretch, or we call it stretch, but it's really tension? Or is there maybe a sense of compression somewhere? You might notice tension on one side of the body and compression on the other. So just notice. And then the next time you inhale, rise up. Hold your arms for a moment. Notice perhaps the weight of your arms and feel the reverberation of the weight of your arms through your spine. You could even close your eyes for a moment and just notice where you think your head is relative to your shoulders. Is it directly above? Is it ahead of or behind? Just being curious. Resting and grounding through the base of the spine and perhaps expanding through the crown of the head. Of course, if the arm hold is becoming too long and tedious, you can always end it. As you also tune into your sense of stability at your center, at your core. And then with your next exhalation, you can release your arms down, maybe nice and slow. And take a few rounds of breath here. Again, reflecting on sensation in your spine. And then from here, I invite you into a wide-legged child's pose. You can make this as comfortable as possible for you. I choose wide-legged because it gives you a nice option for space for the belly. And then you can have a couple of blocks in front of you, or it could be a bolster and a block, but something that is high enough that you can actually release your chest onto. And then if, I'll show this from the side. If you would like, you can actually create like a little chin rest with the block. So as you lean yourself into the support of the blocks, your chin might come to rest, I hope you can see this, at the forward edge of the block, so that you're supported in a variety of ways. And if this doesn't work for you, then don't worry about it. And then from here, just take a few moments. If you do have the support of the block for your chin, press the chin into the block and open your mouth. Not using, not opening the chin, but opening the mouth upward. And just notice sort of the work that this creates in your temporomandibular joint. Let's do that a couple more times. And then you can let go of that action. And again, rest wherever it feels comfortable for you, with the blocks or without.
And then from here, I like to have my arms ahead of me like this with the elbows bent. We'll take some rotation. We'll start with the left, just so I can look at you and don't have to switch sides. You could start on either side. And see if you can keep a relative amount of stability in the lower back and in the pelvis, and see how much rotation you can find here just in the thoracic spine. So just in the top. You're not going to come up very high. Just lifting and isolating some rotation into the upper spine. Do that 3 or 4 times on the left, and then 3 or 4 times on the right. And then you can press yourself up. You can stay in the same seat that you were in, sort of a wide-legged child's seat without actually being in child's pose, or you can pick any other kind of seat. And then explore, keeping the torso steady, your amount of rotation in your neck. And just as we were with the lateral flexion, don't like push your range of motion here, but just check in, and you can do this with the movement of your breath. So exhaling to turn, inhaling to come forward, just noticing rotation in the neck. Maybe being somewhat curious whether your rotation to the right is the same as your rotation to the left. Mine never is. So just be curious. I'll do that one more time on each side, or if you feel done, you can be done. And come to neutral. And then go ahead and grab a block. If you have one of the skinnier blocks, use that, or you could even use a folded blanket of some sort. We'll come in sort of a, well, we actually can just be kneeling. And bring one knee to the blanket. And then press into that knee to bring up the other leg. And just sort of notice how this reverberates in your lumbar spine. This is another way of creating lateral flexion, not rotation, but lateral flexion in the low spine. Basically start in lateral flexion on one side, and then you bring it to the other side. And then switch sides. Bringing the other knee to a blanket, and then pressing into the knee on the blanket or the block to help bring the floating knee up. And just feel this movement in the hips. You could even bring your hands there to sense this with a little feedback, a little biofeedback from the outside. One last time. Release your blanket and release yourself back to a seat. And then bring your arms to shoulder height, and let's take a rotation to the right with the exhalation. Inhale yourself back up and forward. And exhale to the other side. And just notice how naturally the opposite hip wants to move forward, and indulge that body wisdom as you move through a few cycles of rotation here. And as you do this, just notice where you feel rotation in the spine. And so maybe to make this a little bit easier to discern, the next time you've rotated to the right, with your exhale, hold here. Notice how the left hip comes forward. And then just notice what all is rotating, which sections in the spine are turning here. You could play with rotation in the neck as well, so you could look over the back shoulder. You could even bring a hand to your low back, to your lumbar spine, to see what you feel here. And whatever you do, don't force anything. Like, don't use the power of your arms to crank yourself into the rotation, but instead let the rotation happen naturally. And then the next time you inhale, bring yourself to center, resettle yourself, because your left hip crept forward, so neutralize. And then with an exhalation, rotate to the left and let that right hip move with you. And again, don't muscle yourself into the turn. Feel it from the inside out. Maybe include the neck, maybe not, your call. And just notice, again, you could bring one hand to the low back. Just notice where you really feel the turn in the spine. And you might feel it everywhere, but maybe there's a section of the spine where it just feels more natural to be rotated. And maybe there's a section of the spine where it doesn't feel very natural to be rotated. Just notice. One more breath here. And then with your next inhalation, lift the arms and return forward. And just hold your arms up for a moment, feeling their weight. Reverberate through your spine. And maybe if you're game, come to standing on your knees. And just notice. You'll have to notice this from the inside out, unless you have a mirror nearby, how your spine is assembled here. You could take a hand and palpate. Like, what are you feeling in the region of your sacrum? In fact, you can take your arms down. And maybe really do just notice. Do you feel a curve in your back at the region of the pelvis? Do you feel any sort of curve in your low back? Those two areas we tend to be able to feel with our hands. It's a little harder to feel your thoracic spine, so you might have to use your imagination for that. And you could bring your hands to your neck to see if there's a bit of a curve in your neck. And now imagine that somebody is coming up behind you and they're placing their hands on your shoulders. Just applying a tiny bit of downward force. Do you sense that your alignment would be stable enough that you wouldn't buckle? Or do you have the sense that if somebody came and placed their hands on you, you would collapse in your spine? And if you have that sense that you might collapse, what could you change in your alignment of the spine to create stability here? You might have more answers for that by the end of the weekend. And then from here, I invite you to move and wiggle and shake and stretch, whatever you need to do.
to sort of de-stress or find ease, or maybe you don't want to wiggle at all, that's okay too. Just notice. And do all of that so that ultimately you can come back to a seat. I know I'm not quite ready to go there. There's been way too much sitting today already. And as you do your intuitive little movements, see if you can actually begin to understand them more. Begin to understand what's happening in your spine, how different movements are connecting to one another. And then when you feel ready, find your way back into a seat. And once again, draw your attention inward into your body. You could close your eyes, you could cast them downward, or you can have them wherever you would like. And notice if there have been any changes, either in your physical experience or in your vital presence, your energy, maybe in your mood, maybe in your mind. Do you feel any differently connected to your wise, intuitive self or your joyful self? Just notice. If anything shifted, it's totally okay if nothing's different at all. But just be open to the idea of exploring whether a shift happened, whether physically, energetically, mentally, emotionally, intuitively. And then if it feels auspicious to you, you might draw your hands to your heart, or you can rest them on your legs as you once again bow your head to your heart. Maybe taking a moment to express gratitude to all of those layers of consciousness. The body that moved you through this practice, the breath that gave you the energy for that movement, the mind that cooperated with attention and concentration, your intuition that may have guided some of your ranges of motion, and your joy that either manifested or was present in a more subtle way. Take one more conscious round of breath. Perhaps breathing in with a sense of gratitude, and then breathing out with a sense of reconnecting yourself to the outer world, to this community of yogis. And thank you so much for sharing in this exploration.